This podcast contains potentially adult language, adult themes, definitely drinking, and possibly sexual context. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Drinking with Authors, the podcast. I'm your host, Erica Lance. First, don't forget to like and subscribe. I've started saying that because I wasn't saying it before, and we need that. And if you would love to write a review, we'd love to hear it. Also, if you are an author that wants to be on the podcast, or there's an author you'd like to hear us interview on the podcast, feel free to email us at drinkingwithauthors@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. No hate mail, hashtag no hate mail. Okay, cool. My amazing co-host today in full regalia. You guys, if you're listening, you have to get the YouTube episode of this because she's outdoing everyone on here, is Danielle Orsino. So thank you for being here. And then our guest of honor is Julian Vaca. Woo! Woo! Okay,
hey guys.
Let's talk about what we're drinking. I'm super fancy in my drink today, which I feel good about since I didn't dress up like Danielle did. But I have sparkling sangria, and I put blueberries and raspberries in it. Since we're day drinking, I decided to be fancy. I also have my grapefruit Pellegrino. So super fancy, just across the board. That's what I'm doing.
Wow.
Yes. So Danielle, what are you drinking?
Oh, I went with my little wine spritzer. I got my Barefoot Red Moscato, and then I put it in my goblet, my unicorn goblet, to go with the outfit. So I am good. All done up.
It's awesome. Amazing. Definitely watch YouTube of this. Julian, because I know you can top that.
Yeah, right.
No way that we're ever going to top that. What are you drinking?
So I'm drinking, it's a Tennessee beer called Tiny Bomb, and it is a Memphis-based brewery called Wiseacre. And I'm personally a huge fan of microbreweries and supporting local beer. And so it's a nice, crisp Pilsner. It's really a good summer beer. Yeah, I mean, with the kind of summer that we've been having, in the South and in the Mid-South, it's definitely a refreshing drink. So this was definitely a no-brainer for me on a hot day like today.
Very cool.
Nice.
Sounds awesome. I agree, which leads to our sponsor today, Skunk Brothers Spirits. DWA10 is the coupon code. Check out their website. They have amazing stuff, and they are local, veteran-owned and family-owned. Their grandfather was a moonshiner, so they have something to do with this. Yeah, exactly. Okay, Julian, for anyone who doesn't know who you are, what do you write?
Yeah, so I write speculative fiction for young adults. And my approach to writing is very much, I love to write in the subgenre that I love to read. And, obviously writers are readers first. And so that subgenre was always the one that I gravitated toward the most. And what's great about YA is that you can really play in a lot of different sandboxes, and the YA readership is pretty faithful. So, you could write everything from, coming of age, found family stories like John Green's Looking for Alaska, to, Brandon Sanderson, space operatic stories like his, Skyward series. And really everything in between. So for me specifically, I write, it's really kind of like a cocktail of different subgenres. And so with my debut, The Memory Index, I definitely took that approach to heart. And so just a little bit of background, my story and how I got into writing. I'm a first generation Mexican-American, first generation college graduate, and I moved to rural Tennessee when I was 12 or 13 years old. And I had a really interesting childhood because my parents, who are, both Mexicans, and, my mom, she immigrated from Mexico when she was young. And, they were just very adamant that we were going to speak English exclusively. They didn't want to teach us Spanish. they feared that maybe, you know, it would hold us back academically. And so they were very, very adamant, you guys are going to speak English. We're in America, you're going to speak English. But then interestingly, when we moved to rural Tennessee, I quickly found that, you know, in the town that we were living in, there weren't a whole lot of kids, really any, that looked like me. And so most of the friends that I made were white. But I had this really, I don't know, it was kind of like an identity crisis where I couldn't really fully embrace my heritage because I didn't speak Spanish, but then I never really felt like I completely fit in with my friends because I looked different. And so I always sort of straddled this line and didn't really feel like I was ever fully accepted. And so writing became an escape for me. You know, I tell people it's how I made sense of my messes. It's how I, you know, processed. And so from a very early age, I really, really found a lot of safety in storytelling. And so for a long time, I thought I was going to take that skill and, you know, pursue screenwriting, maybe move back to California, you know, maybe go to like a UCLA or a USC, and maybe one day, you know, work in film. But as I got older and as I, you know, went into college and you know, started to take it a little bit more seriously, I quickly found that with filmmaking, you're relying on a lot of different people, a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of moving pieces. But with the novel medium, the novel writing medium, it's really just you and a blank page. And so that really excited me. And so I just really threw myself into it and started, it was, I guess, around 2011, 2012, when I started taking novel writing a lot more seriously and started self-publishing at first. Amazon had Create Space at the time. And I think it's just called Amazon Publishing now, but at the time it was Create Space, where you could basically just do print on demand. And so, you know, that really excited me. Oh, I can tell a story from start to finish, figure out all the logistics, get it distributed, and get it into readers' hands quickly. And so I've really found my home in novel writing. So to bring that full circle with my debut, The Memory Index, I definitely brought a lot of my childhood experiences of, you know, navigating the South as a Mexican American. I really brought that into the main character, Freya Izquierdo. But then, of course, it's speculative fiction, you know, so it takes place in a reimagined 1980s where there's this enigmatic sort of plague-like phenomenon called memory killer. And it's, you know, humanity is dealing with rapid memory loss. And so there's this corporation called Memory Frontier. They're like the Skynet of the book. They announced that they have groundbreaking technology that's going to change, you know, mankind's fight with memory loss, but they have to trial the tech first. And so they lottery 500 you know, students from across the country and send them to a boarding school in rural Tennessee to trial the tech. And of course, once Freya and her friends arrive, they quickly find that not everything is as it seems. Questions and, you know, uncertainty is around every corner. So that's the fire hose sort of, you know, explanation or answer to your question.
No, I like it. I like it. So let's go back. We're going to Scooby-Doo back a little bit, though, to the first book you actually published. What was that?
So I think it was 2011 or 2012, I self-published a middle grade story called Capernaum. And this was, again, through Create Space. So it was print on demand, but then there was also an ebook version of it available. And this was fun because there is one protagonist, there's one main character, Franklin, but I definitely took the sort of Goonies and Sandlot approach where it's really an ensemble story. So there's multiple characters. And this one was fantasy, sci-fi, and it was basically, I imagined this not too distant future where the Earth and you know, has frozen, or excuse me, the sun and moon have frozen in orbit, and so, or is it no? The Earth has frozen in orbit, and so the sun is sort of locked is fixed in the sky, and so there's these obviously huge you know, ripple effects from that. And so I was just really fascinated with this idea of taking these, these young kids, these young characters, and putting them in a high stakes situation like that. And then of course the heart of the story is the main character's sister goes missing. And that's one of the things that I love about science fiction, fantasy, is those genres are really just a vehicle for unpacking the human condition and themes that are relatable and that can resonate to readers. So I try to keep that in mind with my stories when I'm writing, that the event or the circumstance in the story, the catalyst, while it's fun and it should be interesting, it's really just it should be secondary or tertiary to the heart of your story. What's the actual heart of your story?
That makes sense. How many books did you self-publish?
So I self-published 5.
Wow.
Yeah, I self-published 5. But here's the thing. I always feel like I have to, clarify that. I didn't have kids at the time. We didn't have a mortgage at the time. I was in a position where I could work part-time at a bookstore. And so I was really, I feel like, blessed and sort of set up to be able to actually do that. I know so many people write in the margins of life. Not everybody gets that opportunity to quit their desk job and just go work, part-time as a bookseller and then, work on your stories. So I feel like I was really blessed and really positioned to be able to do that. But yeah, five stories, 5 novels. They're all YA middle grade. And that was I feel like that in a lot of ways was kind of like I don't know, like a workshop of sorts. It kind of prepared me for, publishing traditionally with a big house and working with deadlines and having benchmarks and all those sorts of things, because you really have to be self-motivated to write. I'm sure you can attest to that, Danielle. You really have to be driven.
Oh, totally. Yeah. What you mentioned Skynet, Goonies, and Sandlot in your last couple answers. So do movies definitely, are they a source of motivation? Are they a source of inspiration? And if so, what are your go-to movies for inspiration?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So I mentioned earlier that, I thought maybe one day I would, find some way to sort of work in film. I really loved screenwriting as a medium. So yes, absolutely. Movies have been a huge inspiration in my writing. I have a really interesting, so many interesting elements, I feel like, to my childhood. And one of those things is that my dad introduced me and my sisters to a lot of interesting movies at a very young age. He was one of the first adopters of Laserdisc movies, which.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
Yeah.
I had a friend that collected Laserdiscs. He built a whole shelf in his house. He was like, this is the next big thing. And I was like, oh, Snookums, you weren't around when VHS and Beta fought each other.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. Exactly.
This may not be the best plan. I mean, he bought every Laserdisc that came out. And I was like, oh, you're not waiting for it. We haven't waited for the whatever inevitable eruption between the two.
Right.
And I'm like, these are huge, so I don't think they're gonna win, but whatever.
I feel like that's a theme with Laserdisc owners. They all felt like they were all super passionate about it. And I remember my dad had this huge collection of Laserdisc movies, and he would pull them out whenever we had guests over. And I don't know if you guys remember, but there were some movies, some studios would distribute these beautiful packaging for some movies. Like I remember we had Jurassic Park.
Disney was big like that.
Disney did it. Jurassic Park, like it opened up like a book, and of course these were vinyl record sized, and so it was huge. So anyway, we had lots of really cool movies that probably 8, 9, 10-year-olds shouldn't be watching. Like I saw Edward Scissorhands at a really young age, Tim Burton's Edward Scissorhands, which had a huge impact on me. I don't remember if I saw it in its entirety, but I have memories of seeing snippets of David Lynch's Eraserhead.
Oh my
Whoa.
goodness.
Which again, no young kid has any business
No.
watching that.
No.
No.
I remember seeing Darkman. So anyway,
Oh,
yeah, another kind of,
wow.
intense movie. But my dad, my dad specifically, they loved pop culture. They loved music. They loved movies. And so that was always on and always a big focus in our house. And I feel like that fed my creativity. But I like all kinds of movies. I mean, I obviously I really love, science fiction and fantasy. Arrival was a great fantasy movie that
Mm.
came out a few years ago. I really
Yeah.
I really enjoy Guillermo del Toro. He wrote Pan's Labyrinth,
Yes.
and directed Pan's Labyrinth, which is a great film. And then of course I love the 80s. I mean, I feel like that decade is always in vogue, but all kinds of great movies that came out of that decade. So yes, I love a smattering of all different kinds of movies and TV shows.
Well, talk to us for a minute, because you did self-publishing and now you are published with Macmillan?
So it's actually a HarperCollins imprint.
HarperCollins. Okay, I knew
Yeah.
it was one of the two because we met at
Yeah.
ALA, which
Yeah.
is the American Libraries Association conference. We got to hear you talk a little bit about it, but
Yeah.
how did that happen? How did that go into play?
Yeah. So I have a really unique story, a really unique journey into traditional publishing in that I negotiated my book deal unagented, which I know, for those of you listening who don't know what the usual process is, it basically looks like you have your completed manuscript, then you take that and you query it to agents. So basically you do a bunch of research, you figure out, okay, which literary agents would I potentially, be a good fit for, and vice versa, who can I partner with? So then you start the long, taxing process that is querying agents. You amass an impressive pile of rejection letters. We all do. And then that agent, once you get an offer of rep, they then take your book out, your manuscript out on submission. And then of course, once there's interest, then, the publisher, the acquiring editor will give you an offer, and the rest is history. But, I didn't have that journey. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like self-publishing and having that sort of track record, that follow through, I think showed the acquiring editor at my publisher that, okay, this author has follow through. There's he's serious. And of course, the genre that I write in was, something that they were looking to acquire. So I really feel like that helped, and that positioned me. But basically, the short version of the story is I had an editor friend who I actually paid to proofread and edit my books. And then she pivoted from freelance to working at this particular publisher. She was in a nonfiction imprint. She called me up one day and said, "Hey, I'm probably going to be brushing shoulders with some of the fiction folks. We should get one of your manuscripts in front of them." And that
Wow.
was sort of my,
Wow.
my foot in the door story. And so I don't take for granted how unconventional that really is.
Yeah.
It's not lost on me just how fortunate I am to have been able to get acquired through that way. But now, on the other side of it, I'm sort of working backwards. Now I'm actually in the process of querying agents. So as I'm looking ahead, to my next project, I want to be able to have, an agent in my corner, so that I don't have to worry about that aspect of it. So
No, that's cool. I mean, I think, we talk to a lot of different people, and I think agents can be great. I think they, you have to find the right ones. You have to find good ones, because they can also be a barrier to you getting your work out in the universe, because they will do other things.
yeah, well, absolutely. And you also have to consider, for a lot of the big agencies, you may just be a number to them. They have a huge, deep roster of other authors that they're trying to, provide a service for, and that they're trying to champion for. So I think that is definitely something that should be taken into consideration when you're researching, agents. Are you just going to be sort of, lost in the numbers, and
See,
are you going to have a lot of, actual interface with this particular agent? Lots of things to consider for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree 100%. So now you're traditional. What are your self-published books still out there?
So unfortunately, they're not. And I had talks with my editor about this when we were working through the memory index, and we kind of decided that we wanted to position me as a debut author for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons was I had started a trilogy and I had only self-published 2 of the planned 3 books. And so that third book is, I'd probably say 70% finished. I it's probably 70% completed, but I never went over the finish line with it, and so that story is open-ended. And so I do plan to revisit that at some point. But then the other thing is, I didn't have an incredible team of proofreaders and editors working on my early stuff. And so what I didn't want to happen was for someone to come across the memory index and read the description and think, oh, well, this sounds kind of cool. Maybe not necessarily up my alley, but I wonder what else the author's written. And then maybe they went on my Amazon author page, found something else, purchased that, and maybe the quality isn't quite up to par. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's a little inconsistent. I don't know. And I would just hate for that to maybe turn them away from reading the memory index and maybe reading future works of mine. So all that to say, we kind of decided, let's pull those off the digital shelves, and maybe revisit re-releasing those things. Interestingly, guys, this kind of blew my mind. I thought, okay, after I get traditionally published, maybe the next obvious progression of this is going into my back catalog and just re-releasing those, repackaging them through a major house. But publishers are not keen on releasing something that's been previously published, even if it was just self-published and sold 100 copies. For whatever reason,
that's not true with all publishers, because as a publisher, that's literally something I just
I
sent
was
out
just
an
gonna
ad
say.
out for authors. Do you have a back catalog? Reach out to
Interesting.
us and let us know.
Yeah.
Only because there are numbers that go with this, and it's something ironically that's come up on the last couple of podcasts. And I realized we need to take a break. So no cliffhanger, but we'll be right back with the numbers and why I say that. So we'll be right back on Drinking with Authors.
Sample locally sourced, quality distilled spirits in the beautiful Columbia River Gorge. At Skunk Brothers Distillery, we're family-owned, brewing small batch grain-to-bottle spirits, just like our grandfather did back in the Prohibition era. From handcrafted bourbons and moonshine to flavored blends and cordials infused with local fruit. Join us for a tasting tour and buy Skunk Brothers spirits straight from the source.
It's all in the family at Skunk Brothers Spirits, located in Stevenson, Washington.
Okay, we're back. Cliffhanger. Dun, dun, dun. So here's the thing. There are some numbers, and it's not like a lot of people don't realize that only about 10% of New York Times bestselling authors, I'm doing air quotes, actually make a profit on their book. It's very low. And if you want to make money as an author, you really don't start seeing the juice worth the squeeze until you have at least 6 books out. Then they say if you really want it as a living, you have to go between 26 and 40 books on the shelves, which means you have to have a backlist, because they'll buy your book, your first book, but then they go, okay, I want more by this person. And then there's nothing else. And unfortunately, with most traditionally published books, and I think it's great when somebody can get traditionally published, if that's the route they want to go, is it takes years. Like, even if they want book two is not going to come out in, I don't know, hypothetically 6 months like we do it. Book 2 is going to come out maybe 2 or 3 years. And you lose an audience like that. Like, I don't think a lot of people realize that there are numbers. And yes, you can be more successful. And I'm not saying there aren't exceptions to the rule and stuff like that. But generally, this is what you need to do. So releasing that back catalog would be huge for you once it's cleaned up and up to the par that you want it to be,
I love that.
because you'll keep them more. You'll keep them on the hook more. Like we were talking about that with Danielle. We actually absorbed Danielle after she had published her first book, right?
Yep.
But we're like,
Yes.
you're doing all this promo, which is great. Look at her. She looks fantastic, but you're doing it on one book.
Yeah.
And people want to keep hitting
They
the buy
met me
button.
through the podcast and signed me through the podcast and took me from previous publisher. So
That's awesome.
I'm actually an example of
You're a
exactly what you're
testimony.
talking about.
Yes.
And now I'm on book 4 in my first novella with them. So, and we're discussing even a linear publishing, doing something in graphic novels. That might be something to consider.
That's so cool.
and going back and taking something like the memory index and maybe turning into a graphic novel or a different, an avenue for your readers who, this way you could clean it up and take it into a different type of, way.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's super encouraging, because those early books, I'm still incredibly proud of them, and they hold a special place in my heart. You think about, previous writings, previous art that you've created. This is true of any medium. But when you revisit it, it triggers so many emotions and so many memories about maybe where you were at in that period of life. And so, all that to say, I would love for an opportunity to revisit that back catalog. So it's encouraging to hear you say that that's something that, just because one publisher says that that's not something that they want to prioritize, or that that's not feasible, doesn't mean that all publishers are going to have that approach.
I think that's really important, and I think that's an interesting aspect for authors in general, because we're judged by what we did at one point in time and the mistakes we've made or things we've learned. And then we can fix it in book 2, book 3, or the next series, but we're still judged by that first book. So I understand not wanting people to see it, because they go back and go, well, what did he do here? And then you're judged moving forward. So it's hard to redo it. But if you have a chance to put out, as I did with these guys, a second edition, and fix and tweak, it's always interesting to kind of go moving forward. But what have you learned, you think, since the memory index? How has your writing changed, and what have you learned moving forward?
So I think a couple of things. The first thing that comes to mind, and I think this is like anything else, but as you continue to work on your craft, you just get better. You just get more confident. The skills are sharpened. And so, from self-publishing through my journey into traditional publishing, working with, a team, I think I can look back and say, wow, okay, I can actually pinpoint actual growth in my craft. And so that's definitely one thing. And then the other thing too is, when you're self-publishing, there is, at least this was my experience, there was an urgency to get the story done, get it in a proofreader and an editor's hands, get their feedback, tweak it, and get it out the door. There's a lot of hurrying up and waiting in traditional publishing. I'm sure you can, attest to this, Danielle. And so, but that's actually been really good for me, because it's taught me patience. It's taught me how to sit with things. So it's like, on the one hand, you're under a deadline and you have to make decisions and you have to make choices. And that sort of becomes, that sort of impacts your creative process. On the other hand, there's a lot of waiting in between. And so I actually think that that's had a positive impact on me as a writer. I think it was Lev Grossman, the author of The Magicians. I think he is credited as saying, one of the best things that a writer can do for their story is, once they've completed the manuscript, lock it up in a safe, and then don't open it up again for as long as humanly possible, because the separation between typing the end and when you actually revisit it is actually going to be hugely beneficial to making that story the best it absolutely can be.
Do you think you've learned anything, just aside from yourself as a writer, but as a person, especially going back and taking pieces of your childhood and implementing them into the story? What have you learned about yourself as a person and a human being as you've gone through the journey?
That's such a great question. I think the biggest thing that I struggle with, and I don't know if this is anything that I'll ever fully sort of grow out of or shake, is definitely imposter syndrome. Just this sense of like, why me? Like, I don't deserve to be at the table. Like, there are far better writers out there who, for whatever reason, it's just not clicking. The agents aren't biting. They're just not, and they're unpublished. Why me? Why am I published? And so I think to answer your question, the biggest growth that I've sort of experienced is, I think, overcoming insecurities and just being really proud of the work that I've done, and having that sense of self-confidence. It's just not really in my nature to go out on social media and sort of, boast or proclaim about, exciting things. And, obviously I do that for the book, and my publisher has been really encouraging me to do that a lot more consistently. But yeah, I guess I would say, being comfortable with self-confidence, but balancing that obviously with humility, if that makes sense.
No, that totally makes sense. Do you feel that you've connected more with your heritage as you've taken this journey more? Are you going down that path and trying to find that connection more? Have more people spoken to you and fans come forward to kind of identify with maybe they didn't have that connection with their own heritage?
Absolutely. I had a really cool, I have a really cool story about the memory index and getting feedback from one of my aunts, one of my tias. She lives in, so my mom's one of 9, and all of her siblings live in California still. And one of my tias, she was in education, and she's very learned, very smart, very brilliant. And so, because I don't speak Spanish, just very broken Spanish, I wanted to have my character, use certain Spanish sayings and have certain phrases, and I wanted to pepper her internal dialogue with some authenticity. And so I sent my tia Teresa the manuscript, and we were able to go through it together, and she made sure that all of my uses of different Spanish sayings and phrases were accurate. And so that was a really cool bonding experience. Real quick, are you guys hearing any feedback from me?
No, and I'm sorry I disappeared for a moment. My internet is delightful up in the mountains. Sometimes it's like, you know what, I'm done working for today, but we're not. So it's super fun.
Okay, good. I sorry, I didn't know if maybe you guys were picking something up. I heard a little bit of scratching. But anyway, to answer your question, Danielle, yes, there was a really cool exercise there of just going back and learning and maybe relearning certain things about my heritage, and sort of infusing that into the manuscript.
I think that's really cool. I'm half Puerto Rican, and I was told the same thing. You're here, you speak English. My grandmother never spoke Spanish. She's from Old San Juan, and they never spoke Spanish in the house. So, and my mother did speak Spanish, and it wasn't until we got lost in Santo Domingo that my father finally looked at her and said, "You need to speak Spanish and get us the hell out of here," because they were throwing hot peanuts at us.
Oh gosh.
And we were in the capital getting lost, and finally my mother said something in Spanish and got us out. And my father was like, "Was that so difficult?" But we never spoke Spanish. Now, nothing. I mean, I took Spanish in high school. I failed it. But, and I went back and spoke Spanish once to my grandmother, and she looked at me, she went, "That's not Spanish." She's like, "Don't ever do that again." She was like, "No, don't. She's like, "You're murdering the language. Don't ever do that." But I never identified, because, it was always like, "Don't tell anybody you're Puerto Rican." Like, shh, don't, so I could, when you were saying that, I totally, I got that you were saying was just this attitude of, not really knowing and not identifying with one way or the other, and how do you get it. And I actually wound up writing in one of my stories coming up, the protagonist is half Italian, half Puerto Rican. And somebody says, "You're short." And she goes, "No, I'm just half Italian, half Puerto Rican. I talk with my hands, but I don't understand what I'm saying." And it's kind of, not great. Getting it, but always wanting to explore that side. Have you decided to take any Spanish classes or do anything just to kind of jump into that and explore a little bit more to go down that? Or have you decided, I'm just going to leave it alone, it's good where it is, I'm good?
No, it's a great question. So the answer is yes, I absolutely, and fully intend to learn Spanish. And the way that we're going to do it is actually with our kiddos. And so my wife, she's white, and so with our kids being mixed, we really want to embrace and sort of, I feel like the pendulum always swings the other way with our generations. And so my mom, who is just an educator, her whole adult life, taught, as Spanish, taught, just all kinds of different courses throughout elementary, middle, and high school grade levels. But anyway, so she's retired now. And so the thinking is once our kiddos get to the appropriate age, she's going to start teaching them Spanish. And my wife and I want to be very much involved in that process. So it'll be sort of all of us collectively learning together. The only reason we haven't done it quite yet is because our oldest has a speech delay. And so he's 7 years old, and for the first couple of years of elementary school, we were just trying to make sure that he was confident in English and he was overcoming those sort of barriers first. But now that he's sort of closing the gap and he's getting more confident with reading and writing in English, I feel like within the next year or two, we're all going to sort of jump into that as a family.
Oh, that's great. Erica, I feel like I'm totally taking this over, so I don't want to do that.
How you exited and came back. It's totally fine. You take over. You look more awesome than I do anyway, so go for it.
Barbara Walterings it, so I was like, uh-oh, better sit back.
Yeah, no, you're perfect. I do have a question about what has surprised you on traditional versus self-publishing? Like, what were you like, wow, I had no idea that was coming at me?
Yeah, great question. Definitely the first thing that comes to mind is titling. So I think I had it in my head where you write a book, you have your manuscript, and you have your title. And it's like, those are inseparable. I mean, you can't have one without the other. Like within the first couple of months after signing, after I delivered my manuscript, my editor said, all right, so by the way, just want to let you know, we're going to have a titling meeting with the whole team. So feel free to send me your wish list, of titles. And I was thinking, wait, what? I thought the title of the book was set in stone, and it kind of threw me off. I got kind of anxious because the title of the book was originally The Memory Engine. And they had some concerns that was too masculine and that wouldn't appeal to female readers. Really interesting. And so I thought, okay, so that really surprised me. Now, to my editor and the team, to their credit, I sent like a very detailed list. I was like, all right, if I'm going to get a say in this, I'm going to have a say in this. so I made my wish list and prioritized it by my absolute favorite all the way to least favorite. And we ended up deciding together on the memory index. So that was probably the first thing. And then the second thing was, and I know it's different at every publisher, but I was very surprised at how willing my team was to let me be involved in the cover. So yeah, I've heard, I've got an author friend who's published with Penguin, and he said he didn't see his covers until like way down the line, until they were like, all right, what's your favorite of these 2 or 3? My editor said, why don't you send us a mood board? Send us some covers that you like. What are some design elements that you like and dislike? And so I was surprised at how much they let me contribute to that conversation. I'm very, very pleased with the final product for sure.
That's very cool, because most people on both of those accounts do not have nice stories to tell about what they encountered with that. You know what I mean?
No, not at all. I've got another author friend too, who I should connect you guys with. She's got her debut coming out through Mindy's Book Studio. So it's Mindy Kaling's new imprint with Amazon. She's got her debut coming out next. Yeah. Her book's called I'll Stop the World. It's YA, comes out in April. But I was actually just texting with her yesterday, and I was like, so when are we going to see the cover? And she was like, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen anything. Which April feels like not that long away in publishing, you
No,
know?
it's not, especially when are they putting it up for pre-order?
It's available for pre-order. It just says cover to be revealed soon or something like that. Interesting, right?
Oh, I have
Wow.
so many thoughts on that. I have so many thoughts on that.
Well, it could very well be this is she was only the second, I think, book acquired through this imprint. So I think they're probably still trying to find their footing.
Well, it's true, but that's weirdness. That's weirdness. Because I hate to say, you do judge a book by its cover.
You do.
I was-
Say that all
yeah.
the time. Like, you judge a book by its cover. And so if you do not have the right cover on the book, or you don't even have a cover on the book, you're not going to get pre-sales, really. I mean,
It's a really good point. I think, especially in this day and age where there's so much vying for our attention. I mean, it's like stimulation overload everywhere we go. And so you want something visually arresting, something that's going to, intrigue someone. So that's a really good point.
it's interesting. Okay, what kind of environment do you write in? So you used to write pre having children and stuff, and having small people around you changes writing things. So when do you write? What is your writing environment like?
Yeah. So right now, I balance writing with a full-time job. I work in marketing for a really cool music licensing company in East Nashville, and so it's a full-time remote job, and they have been incredible supporters and advocates for my book and for my novel
That's great.
writing pursuits. It is great. I've worked in other environments where if you do something outside of what you were hired to do, it's a threat. It's not something that's celebrated.
Mhm.
And so the fact that I have support and buy-in from my team is incredible. So right now, it's a lot of writing in the margins. It's a lot of early morning, cup of coffee, 500 words, lunch break, scarfing, a sandwich at my desk, 250 words. And then late into the evening, after spending time with my family and everyone's gone to bed, maybe another 750 words. It's not ideal, obviously, because I don't know if you're like this, Danielle, or you guys, if you've spoken with other writers who are like this, but when you're writing, there's almost like a ramp up period. So it's like you almost need like 2 hours, 3 hours, where that first 30 minutes or maybe even longer is just staring at the page and just figuring out what you want to say. Then you start writing, then there's the snowball effect, then you start writing, then you get into like a nice groove. And so there's that ramp up period. And then inevitably there's always this sort of wind down period. And so I had to sort of kind of adjust my process and my workflow. But in a lot of ways, it's challenged me and it's pushed me out of my comfort zone. And so writing in spurts has really helped me become more efficient and more economical with my time.
Well, I think also as you grow as a writer and you do more writing, not that there's a lot of people that have habits and stuff like that, but I think you also can end up with finding ways to hit that ramp quicker. Like, not necessarily having, I mean, some people have to have it, but it's like being able to hit that ramp a little quicker when you're going for it and going, okay, good. Do you listen to music while you write?
It depends on the scene. So I will say 90% of the time I have to write in silence or coffee shop chatter. Like, I can do that. There is that occasional 10 to 15% of the time where it's nice to have some ambient sort of atmospheric music kind of playing in the background. I really like listening to slow meadow. I really like listening to, there's another artist, they're called Hammock. You can find these artists on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon. But anyway, it has to be atmospheric ambient music if I am going to be writing with it. I can't do music with, vocals though.
Very few people can. I know a few,
Really?
but very few people can, because I tell people this all the time. When I'm writing, I listen to Celtic music. I listen to Celtic fairy music all the time because there aren't any words.
Yeah.
And if there are words,
I write with a soundtrack. I don't understand.
You do, and I know like Val and stuff does. But the problem is that if I hear the words, one, if it's a song I like, I'll start singing it because I'm that person that regardless where I'm singing, but then I'm getting into the song and not into what I'm writing. And so there's a lot of people, I know you look shocked, but there's a lot of people who do that, Danielle.
I got RuPaul's Drag Race going half the time while I'm writing. I don't know how you write in silence. I don't know. The voices in my head get too loud.
There it is. That's why.
I've heard that from a lot of authors. There's some that are like, I cannot have any interruption at all. And I'm so used to just noise and noise around me. Like I loved writing in coffee shops back pre-pandemic.
Yes.
And stuff because I like the noise of the people around me and things like that. I absolutely love that. It's just,
I do too. And it's a bit of a cliche, I know, but there is a kind of synergy when you're at a coffee shop and there's other creatives around and there's the hustle and bustle of, people at the queue get ordering their coffee. And there is something about that you kind of feed off of. I would say, like, given the choice between, writing in the home office or writing at a coffee shop, I would definitely pick the coffee shop. So yeah, and also I'm just a huge lover of good coffee. Like I love good coffee. I love to consume it. I love to have, meetings over coffee. It's one of my love languages.
No, I think it's great. Okay, Danielle, we're gonna have to wrap up this podcast. So I'm gonna give you, the Fake Queen, the final question.
Nice.
I would like to know. No pressure. Oh, I think it's the horns today. It's got to be the horns. When in doubt, go with the horns. How do you deal with criticism? I think it's something that all authors, we always get the proverbial, you have to have a tough skin. But how do you deal with criticism? Like, do you stay away from Goodreads, or do you just dive right in and just take it on the chin?
It's a great question. I had an author friend who said Goodreads. This is how he defined Goodreads. He said it's an incredible place, an incredible tool for readers. It's the worst for authors. And I thought that was a really good point, because it is a great place to, have your digital shelves, rate and create lists and recommendations and everything. But then as an author, if you get on there, it can be a slippery slope of, here's what I try to remember, that you're not going to please everyone. And one of the best examples of that is just pick any author who is just beloved, a household name. Go to one of their most recent works on Goodreads, and you will inevitably find all kinds of people who have 1-2 star reviews, and they're just ripping it to shreds. And it might perplex us. Like, how are you finding this much issue, taking this much issue with, with this particular, I mean, they're a New York Times bestseller. So sometimes I'll just remind myself that that's the reality in which we live, that you're just not going to be able to please everyone. And so, yeah, it's definitely not something that, because I definitely still continue to struggle with insecurity. I mentioned earlier that, I have that imposter syndrome that I'm still trying to navigate. But I just try to remind myself, like, look, ultimately, you just can't please everyone. And so, yeah, that's what I try to remember. That's kind of my North Star in that respect.
I think that's awesome.
It's true. I always tell people, if you really want to see, go look up Hunger Games and just click on the 1-star reviews from them.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, I've done, Deborah Harkness, I've looked up. I always say, I feel like Goodreads I describe it as if you were walking down the street as a woman and you wanted to know what everybody thought of your outfit. That's Goodreads.
Wow.
Like, you wouldn't want to know. You don't want to know what other women think of what you're wearing. So don't go on Goodreads as an author. That's kind of what it tells you. It's like reading people's minds. Sometimes you just don't want to know.
No, I think that's true. I think one thing reviews can be good for, and we talk about reviews on this show, but one, you have to have thick skin. to read reviews.
Mhm.
The only thing I think they can be useful for is not the 1-star, 2-star. Look at the 4-star, 5-star, and hear
Mhm.
what people liked about the book, what
Mhm.
characters that they enjoyed and stuff like
Yes.
that. Because we're in our heads so much that we may think a character is amazing and awesome, and then you go and read it and they like some sub character that was just a plot
Yes.
device for you, and then you have to take that character, maybe if you want to, and create a novella or something about that character, or entwine them in
Agreed.
the next book a little more, because you never know what is going to be the one thing that people enjoyed the most. You hope
You
it's
know,
the neat things, but that happens all the time where people are like, I like Bob the
you
chauffeur, and you're like, seriously, why did you like Bob the
you
chauffeur? He's a plot device, and everybody's like, he's the best, and you're like, okay, cool, I'll
Bob's
write more
getting his own
Bob.
book.
well, you know what's interesting? Sorry, I know we need to wrap up, but this is something we didn't even get into. To that point, so the sequel, so Memory Index is a duology, and the story continues and concludes in the second book, which is set to release in April of next year. And so I'm currently working through sub edits on the second book, and I've been able to see that there have been a few people on Goodreads who have said, I really liked it. The beginning was awesome. The end blew me away. The pace kind of dropped off a little bit in the middle, but otherwise, blah, blah, blah. And so it's like, okay, interesting. So they had concerns about the pacing. So
Yes.
how can I take that feedback in a positive way and just keep that in mind as I'm working through
That's a
the
good
second
point.
book. Yeah. And so and not a lot of authors are afforded that, but again, with this being a series, that was a unique thing where book one's about the pub, Goodreads reviews are starting to trickle in. I can take some of those and use it to kind of inform how I'm revising book two. So that's been neat.
No, I think that's right. Okay, tell our audience your book titles and
Yeah.
how to find you as an author on social media.
Yeah, so my book that's publishing next month is called The Memory Index, and that's available for pre-order. And then the sequel is called The Recall Paradox, and that is also available for pre-order as well. And you guys can follow me on Instagram. My account is Julian Ray Vaca, so JulianRay, and then V as in Victor, ACA. And that's the best way to connect with me, because that's probably where I guess I end up posting most on Instagram. And I do have a TikTok, but I don't post on there as much as I probably ought to.
Do you have a newsletter that people can follow?
No, but I'm getting one set up. So in August or September, maybe if you do a social post on this down the road, at that point I'll have one set up and we can plug it.
What's your website?
JulianRayVaca.com. So just like my Instagram handle, but .com.
Well, if it's going to be ready, then when this
Yeah.
is out, it will be ready. So go subscribe to his newsletter on his website. Very cool. It's been wonderful having you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you guys so much. This was a blast. Any opportunity to get to talk with other writers over beer is a really, really good time.
Yes, since we originally invented such a thing. But this has been amazing. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you, of course, Fairy Queen, for being my co-host today. This
As
is
always.
Drinking with Authors. I've been your host, Erica Lance. Daniela Orsino was my co-host, the Fairy Queen. Julian Vaca has been our guest. And Skunk Brother Spirits has been our oh my goodness, sponsor. I can use my entire brain. Yay, wine. VWA is a coupon code. We'll see you guys next time.
Like and subscribe.